you need to prepare for something else, and I'm sure you're preparing for that. Electioneering for 2019, general elections, will be 2018. So, your being the central bank governor means you are there when the first election was taking place and when the next one is taking place. So what will be the lessons you learned from 2014, 2015, preparing you for 2018, 2019 inflow political spending in the domestic economy?
Well, and the point is that the Monetary Policy Committee and the Monetary Policy Authorities, we will analyze the data that we have. Of course, from time to time during the election, there's always electioneering spending. And that is the reason why the Monetary Policy Committee will look at what is the optimal level of liquidity that you need to run the economy at a particular point in time. And the appropriate decisions will be taken to ensure that the adverse consequences of spending, right, does not really result into unexpected outcomes that may hurt the economy at that time.
Would that be a difficult thing for you?
Nothing is difficult. Nothing is impossible, but I'm telling you that this will be solved. Just like 2015 came and it went, right? Unfortunately, even it came at a time when there was an economic crisis. We're hoping that 2018, with the stability in crude prices, coupled with the fact that we're building reserves at this time, coupled with the fact that by that time, hopefully, we would have been able to tame inflation to a level that is comfortable and that is good for the country, we will deal with the situation when it confronts us.
Let me ask you about, let's chat to the state of the banking sector and the financial system. Give us a status report.
I'd like to say that the strategic health of the banking industry is sound, because the major parameters you will use to assess it are still good as I speak with you. No doubt that if you have a chain, there are some strong points of a chain, there's also weak points of a chain, right? There are some weaknesses that have occurred arising purely from the issues brought on the exogenous shocks that we have seen. But I'm saying in an economy where the standard practice for instance, capital adequacy ratio is 8%. The smallest bank in Nigeria, central bank insists that they must keep capital adequacy ratio of 10%. The bigger banks, national and international banks, must have capital adequacy ratio of 15%. So what we find is that maybe a bank, maybe instead of 10, hits a threshold of about 9.8, 9.9%, we'll try as much as possible to put pressure on that bank to ensure that they build capital by raising more capital, right? Or that they retain more of their profits so they don't pay dividend or pay less of dividend to be able to shore up their capital. Those are the kind of things we're doing. But the important things I'm seeing, even the 9.8 or 9.9%, which is maybe 0.1% below the threshold set by the central bank, is still above the standard practice or standard expected of 8%. The banking industry, the liquidity ratio that we find in the banks is still very good. As I speak to the liquidity ratio, average liquidity ratio is over 40% for all the banks. Do you understand? Now, aside from that, the only area where people have talked about is the level of NPLs. And let me tell you this. The level of NPL today that we have, which average about, in this case, maybe about 9 or a few points above 9%, is not unusual. And I will give you an example. In 2010, just about the time the stress test was conducted, just about the time we were just beginning to exit the last set of global shock. You know, there was a shock that was a momentary one for about 8 or 9 months between 2009. NPLs rose to 34%. 34%. But it came down, and of course, because of this shock again that started in 2015, we're seeing that the NPLs have moved up. And the bank and central bank is compelling the banks to increase their level of provisioning. And when you talk about provisioning, you are taking out of the earnings of the bank, setting it aside to say if this loan is not doing well, you take out of their profit and say, use it to write down your NPL. When you write down your NPL, the bank's NPL comes to a comfortable level, and that they can go back and pursue the borrowers who took the loans and never paid, and with that, if they recover the money, they write it back into their profit. So that's what we are doing, and I do not think that what is happening now is unusual. It is expected of I use the word, the global economy that is faced by challenges, and of course, it has its own effect on Nigeria, and we are going to manage it. Thank you.
The last two governors who sat in the office seem to knock the banks around a lot. But people believe that because you are not so hard on the banks. The first one went with the bank consolidation, and your immediate predecessor knocked about 5 or 6, 8 banks off the street and all of that. Are you going to knock anyone? Do you see any of the banks that you need to knock within the term remaining in office? It looks like you're confirming most likely that you're very soft on the banks.
You see,
are you soft on the banks?
I don't think I am soft on the banks. And if you ask the banks today, and the basic practice you find all over the world is that banks pay heavy fines. You've heard about banks, I don't want to mention their names. When there's an infraction, they get to pay billions of dollars. In Nigeria, we've seen banks pay as high as 4 billion naira in fine. It has never happened in the history of the country, right? So different regimes may come with different approaches. And I can tell you, that is not about, we are not about killing a bank. Because you must realize that the banks are not owned by just those shareholders. We've come to a regime where we need to begin to say that banks are owned by depositors, not by shareholders. So when you kill a bank, you think you are killing individuals who brought in capital to run those things. You are telling a lie. And I can give you this example. One of the weak banks that we are trying to deal with at this time, the institution of the bank, has a customer base of 4.5 million people. What do you think central bank will tell Nigerians, 4.5 million people, if you decide to liquidate the bank at a time when the economy is still struggling out of recession? So you need to be very careful when you come up and say, look, what you want to do is kill a bank so that I cannot explain to 4.5 million people who have saved their life earnings, their life investment in banks. And that is why we believe that
that's what part of what that's what part of a central bank should do. Yes. Take out any of the banks that is systemically corrupting the system, as it were.
It depends on the level of corruption, Bosun. What I'm saying here is that it is not as bad to a point where you liquidate a bank.
Well, one of these banks is holding about almost $60-something million of a government money in TSAs that should go there, and they've asked for central bank guarantee. You're not providing them. So, should that bank go down? Would you do it?
You see, the point is this. You should not, what we're doing, we're discussing with the bank a program of repayment. And I say this, if the bank, if it was a naira money of TSA, it's easy for us to debit the bank and pay the government. Then because this is foreign currency, we are not in control of foreign currency account that you will debit and all that. So we will need to put in place an arrangement where the bank must look for a way to borrow foreign currency or source foreign currency to be able to pay these banks. And that's what we are engaging the banks. And I'm pretty much optimistic that this matter will be. I mean, we started from as high as $6 billion. But it's down to the kind of levels you are talking about now. So we've made good progress, but I can assure you that those funds will be recovered.
There's another commercial bank you've been spoon-feeding, and the financial statement is not yet out for even for.
Let me tell you, there's nothing wrong in spoon-feeding a bank, because the central bank is a lender of last resort. Do you understand? And what we're doing is part of our core mandate, that when a bank is in a kind of situation where they need help that can take them out of a problem, that we should do so. We're only playing our role as a lender of last resort.
Mr. Governor, do you think you've done enough controversial monetary policy stance, like the ban of FX on 41 items, and you think you're now coasting home in just about less than 2 years of your tenure at the central bank?
Well, thank you very much again, Bosa, for bringing me to the issue of 41 items. There's hardly anyone who sees me that never talks about 41 items.
I was trying to avoid it because I was upset about it initially. A lot of people
were upset about it. Now.
Well, your view is important because you're the one, and I was thinking perhaps you will reduce the 41 items or you will increase it to 100, but you seem to be quiet about it recently.
Well, first of all, you don't want to increase it because that it's like people almost think that they won't cost my dead mother about those affected by the 41 items. But I think the point is...
How did you arrive at the 41 in the first? Why not 42?
Okay, let me tell you this. It was a situation where we came from having depreciated the currency, and we began to say, what are the items that people are importing into the country that we can produce in the country? And we decided to draw up a list. I consulted with a couple of people, different people. And that, of course, naturally also consulted with the presidency, indeed, in this case, the president. And he said, look, why do we need to allocate foreign exchange to import goods that we can produce in this country? We came from a regime at a time in this country, in the 50s and 60s. This country survived with revenues from agriculture. We grew up reading in economics textbooks, government textbooks, about the granite pyramid, about cotton, about cocoa, about palm oil. Nigeria, Bosen, was the largest producer of of cotton, with 40% market share at a time. We were exporting palm oil, and this country was surviving from revenue from palm oil. But unfortunately, because we found oil, we lowered our guards, and then everybody ran to Lagos and Abuja. Everybody left the farms. But unfortunately, now that the oil price, we have been beaten by the shock, we're now beginning to say we needed to go back to it. So we're saying, what are those items that we're importing that we can produce locally? In fact, I was abused by a magazine that said I just went into a room and was looking at different plans, that I was not ashamed of even picking toothpick. Boston, let me tell you this. Toothpick can be produced in a room less than half the size of where we are right now. The important thing is about what is the outcome of producing toothpick in the country today rather than importing it. What we're saying is that by that you create jobs for your people. Today, there are young school leavers, NYSC graduates, even during their NYSC, they are producing toothpick in Abuja. They are producing toothpick in somewhere in Ogun State.